All right, we'll dive into it pretty quickly, but as Gregory said, I'm No Siegel, co-organizer of the event. My first GreenHomeNYC event was about 10 years ago, and I walked in to an event in Midtown at Forum, and Greg was up here at the podium hosting an event, also with his sunrun jacket on, which I'll have to reference. But we do one solar event a year, and then throughout the year we do forums on different areas of sustainability, from food waste to energy efficiency, etc. We encourage people to get involved. We've got a really strong community here. And if you're interested in something in the realm of sustainability, come talk to one of the volunteers about what you would like to do, whether you'd like to get involved in tours or forums, etc. There are really so many opportunities, and you can kind of make it your own, like we did tonight. So we've got a really stellar lineup of speakers. The first is a very charismatic Jack Clayton, who came up all the way from Asheville, North Carolina. And he's going to be talking about the technologies over at Solar Edge and one of their subsidiaries, Solar Geek, where they have a really innovative racking system that lends itself well to agrivoltaics. Fun fact about Jack, which I'm sure he's going to talk about, he's actually a farmer himself. I'll let you take it away.
I can push the full button. Push that.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining us today. So yeah, like I know say, I am a farmer, cows and sheep and crops up in north of Asheville, North Carolina. But I'm also a GM of a company called Solar Edge. They are an inverter manufacturer, and it's just a little bit of intro into who Solar Edge is. And then what I'm going to do is really kind of tee up what agrivoltaics is. Some of you do. How many in this room are familiar with agrivoltaics? Okay, all right, so a lot of people are familiar, that's great. So I'm gonna skip over stuff that's not essential, but I'm gonna start off with who the company is. Solar Edge, if you've got solar at your house, chances are you've got Solar Edge or one other. We have about 50% market share in the residential solar and on the rooftop. And we're going to be putting our attention on our optimizer today because it has a lot to do with agri-PV. But the reason we have such market share in both rooftop, residential, and commercial is because we've got these optimizers that have rapid shutdown. So that's kind of the heart of our agrivoltaic solution also. So we're about 5,000 people. We were number one in market share, or in revenue, I should say, for the last 4 years. So it's a big company, it's a global company. Let me jump right into agrivoltaics. I put up some pictures here of different agrivoltaics projects, but these are all overseas with the exception of one. And what I wanted to illustrate is we've been doing agrivoltaics since 2018. And in places like Israel, Italy, you can't do ground mount without being dual use. And dual use, agri-PV are kind of synonymous words, so I'll probably use both during it. This is our tracker, and what the difference is, what you're going to see in some of this presentation is agrivoltaics oftentimes, unless it's just sheep grazing or pollinators, is going to be higher off the ground. It just kind of sets up the idea. So I've got 5 things that I'm going to talk about here. Kind of what is agri-PV, why we need it, and a little bit about what Solar Edge brings to the industry. This project right here, Rutgers Animal Farm, some of you are familiar with. This is a project that we supply our equipment to, and this is sort of how they collect their data is with our Solar One solution. So I wanted to break it down because I was just in Chicago at the Agrivoltaics conference, and one of the biggest topics was, what is agri-PV? And I think to start with pollinator and sheep grazing, a lot of the big developers in the US are doing 200 megawatt projects in the South, a lot of projects in Texas, giant projects that are 200 megawatts, north of 200 megawatts, are going to use pollinators and grazing. And what that means is they're putting specific seeds down or they're grazing sheep. And those are both things you can do in a standard utility scale solar project. And then when you get a little bit more specialized, you go into cow grazing and hay production. And so now the whole system has to change. The panels have to be higher off the ground, in this case anywhere from 8 to 15 feet, and the spacing between the rows, the pitch between the single axis trackers, mostly it's going to be single axis trackers, will be 24 feet or more. And these are all full sun. And the reason I make that distinction is because when you get into agrivoltaics as it pertains to crops, you're oftentimes going to be sharing the sunlight with the crops. And so that's where I will kind of focus on that particular sector, because it's, I think, the most interesting. And farmers need versatility because of their crop changes or weather changes, soil conditions. And so, these are all the different categories of agri-PV. And then the next question is, why do we need it? Why do we need it? Every one of these conferences I go to, somebody stands up and says something. I think that U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin, which is modeling, shows that 83% of these projects to 2050 are going to be on farm or ranch land. And that's 1% of the farmland. And that's going to be on productive lands, which means it's near cities. Because of distributed energy, it'll now be closer to the cities, which is really prime farmland. And the way that Andrew Burke broke it down from the Department of Agriculture is that's 10 million acres of solar, which and 80-90% ag, meaning that could be 8 million acres, or as Becca says from the Department of Energy, that's a terawatt over the next 10 years. So that's a lot of growth. And in the U.S. right now, there's sort of a coalition for no solar in my community. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, there's a more openness to agri-PV in my community, but there's a lot of pushback for solar in these different communities. Interesting too that you go to Germany and 73% of farmers that are polled are pro-agri-PV, whereas in the U.S. the Department of Agriculture have polled and 20 to 40% of farmers are pro-agri-PV. So it's really a smaller group of people. So I'm going to focus on Solar Edge for a little bit, like what we bring to the industry, but it also illustrates kind of what the different parts are. Now, this isn't a perfect agri-PV slide here, but it just shows the parts. We are an inverter manufacturer, right? The inverter takes the solar panel DC and turns it into AC and puts it on the grid. That's what an inverter does. And then the optimizer I'll spend a little more time on in a second, but we also do Solar Edge 1, which is a whole monitoring platform. So in that case, we'll control the enterprise world, all the HVAC, but we work with agri-PV specifically too, and I'll show you why in a little bit. And then we bought a tracker company about 2.5 years ago, Solar Geek, and that is a part of our sort of ecosystem of solutions. The optimizer is really the heart of what we do. The optimizer is connected to the back of the solar panel. Every 2 panels has one of these devices, and that device does a whole bunch of cool stuff, which I'm going to show you. And it's kind of the heart of what Solar Edge is doing, and really, I think, an essential for agri-PV going forward. And so, in agri-PV, there's a necessity for safety and data collection. And so, like I said, we own the rooftop in the U.S. because we have this thing called rapid shutdown, and that is otherwise called safety C. So when if that little device on the back of the panel sees a problem, any kind of problem, it goes to 1 volt. So it creates this safer environment for farm workers, farm machinery, livestock, and so safety C is also reducing insurance costs, and that's just kind of part of our ecosystem. And there's also Solar Edge 1, which I showed you in the beginning, which is being used by Rutgers, CSU, and Cornell. And what they're doing is we give them a digital twin of the project. So they have a Google Earth image of the project where we show them what the output is of every single solar panel. We tell them the temperature, the voltage, the current, and now they can start to use that information, especially in the research institutions, but the farmers can, if they're going to want to grow different crops and they want to balance energy with growth, with sunlight for agriculture. So it's, this whole ecosystem that we're adding controls to, or monitoring and safety to. And the last thing, I'm going to move really quickly because we got a lot of other people to talk today, but the other thing about that optimizer is it reduces all mismatch. And the interesting thing about agrivoltaics is you're going to have different, in this particular case, we have a before and after with our tracker on it. Where the tracker can be adjusted to either give it anti-tracking for full sun, for some crops that need to have, like some crops, many crops need full sun from 9 to 11 a.m. Or like grasslands in Colorado, they don't need sun after 11 a.m. And so we can control the light through our system. And then because of the sort of mismatched solution we have with that optimizer, if there's any differences in the array, like there's more backside irradiance on one side of it, or there's dirt or any kind of accumulation, then we erase all that mismatch. Because what happens is, if you have one solar panel that broke, that whole row is going to be diminished significantly. And so we basically bypass any panel that's either poor-performing or you've made some changes, like you've wanted to do anti-tracking in one part of it. And then also with bifacial panels, we also erase all that mismatch. So the bottom line is we make more energy than any other solution out there because of all of those different factors. So that's kind of the end of what I had here. I think there's others that are going to fill you in on the rest of it. So I'm going to introduce the next speaker. Did I do I had 11 minutes.
Nice. That was good. You said it was going to Next up, we've got Dylan McCullough from Vista Energy, VP Project Development. Dylan has extensive experience on the policy side, so he's going to be talking about where policy meets agrivoltaics. I'm hoping to learn a lot. Dylan asked Benoy only for softball questions, so we're not counting on the audience to come up with the more difficult ones for Dylan. I'm sorry.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. Great to be here. Thanks to Green Homes to invite me. It's an honor and a pleasure. I am a little embarrassed about my slides. They're not quite as sharp as yours, but I'll try to at least look good. So conceited. And I'll be perfectly frank. I learned a lot from that prior presentation. Thanks so much. I know I'm very familiar with, broadly familiar with agrivoltaics. Has seen it evolve over the years. It's probably something that in the past maybe 6 to 8 years has gone from very, very small amount of usage to being very, very common throughout the country and the world. Saw some hops being grown in Germany, so they've got solar beer there, and that's just cool to see that going on. But as far as that stuff's concerned, I am novice in that, but I've been working on policy in many different states where we're passing comprehensive solar legislation, and any good solar legislation is necessarily, like, to some degree complicated because there's so many use cases, so many types: residential, commercial scale, utility scale, rooftop, ground mount, on a landfill, floating solar, and along with this is agrivoltaic solar that has different uses, different attributes. And so when you're crafting legislation, if you haven't mentioned these different types in your legislation, certainly some of them are going to be ignored. So if you just say, when a state passes a law and says, we're going to allow solar, we're going to say create net metering where you can get compensated for the solar production at the retail rate of your electricity. If we're going to create a net metering program and that's the only thing we're going to do, it's going to be very difficult for agrivoltaics to pop up in that scenario because you haven't contemplated it in the legislation, or the regulators haven't created special rules in one way or another for it. I've seen these rules discussed and pop up on many levels, and so I'm going to share a little bit about what I've seen. So some real examples of policy stuff. It's a legislative situation or some type of regulatory ruling or a financial incentive, something like that. So that's what we're going to do today. We'll just kick right into it here, starting with the 5 different ways, not the only 5, but 5 different ways to support agrivoltaics. I think I did not type this, so I'm just going to throw my assistant under the bus there for misspelling agrivoltaics, but that's all right. She's been here for 2 months. She's actually doing pretty good for the most part. But agrivoltaics, one interesting bonus points for competitively scored solar programs. So I'll go over these more in detail, but that's one sort of niche way that you can support agrivoltaics. Additional revenue for projects that utilize agrivoltaics. Money talks, right? It's sort of universally acceptable, so this is very common. Relaxed siting rules, allowing for co-location. And again, I'll go into more depth about what all these mean in the ensuing slides. Tax exemptions for photovoltaics. This is also something like a financial incentive, different than revenue. It's a slightly easier from a policy implementation, from getting political capital or something like that, to say, hey, don't collect the tax, than it is to say, spend budget from state or local governments or federal governments, or make utilities spend money for additional revenue. So 2 financial mentions there, 4 and 2 tax exemptions can be a little bit more, like I said, politically palatable maybe. And then preferential permitting, and this one is, we spoke just about, you mentioned, how this is, you touched on briefly in your presentation, so that's really cool. And that one is still a work in progress, and we all are. So I'll keep going then. Okay, bonus points for competitively scored solar. This is very specific to, I have a specific example here, but a lot of times when states or jurisdictions implement solar programs, they have a capacity limit. Basically, only a certain number of megawatts can be accepted into the program and get built the way, get connected to the utility, get the incentive that is offered. It's a limited number, 20 megawatts, 50 megawatts each year, and there'll be like an application window. Maybe it's first come, first serve. If you have all your paperwork, you get in. Some states will basically have a competition. Which solar project is the best? That's what we're going to award the capacity to. The example I have up here is the Illinois Shines Traditional Community Solar Project Scoring Criteria. So I think, show of hands, how many people in the room are familiar with community solar? Okay, cool, great. Community solar is sort of like what we call commercial scale, medium scale projects. Think like 100 to even 1,000 times larger than a household system, but a household system is about 5 kilowatts. These are about 5,000 kilowatts, and then I guess in keeping it in kilowatts, a utility scale ones are like 500,000 or even 100 million, a million, right? Kilowatts. So it's in that middle area there. Like I said, quite a bit bigger than a residential. That's what community solar is. And then the power is generated at one location, and the credit for the power is allocated to members of the community. This is relatively new. It's about a decade old. Of course, everything in solar is actually, if you're like a decade old in solar, then you've been around for a while, right? So it's one of the more established forms of doing solar, and people really want to get involved in these programs. If you have a piece of land or a roof that's good for it in a place that has it, you want to do community solar there. So you've got a lot of people looking to get into your program. You have allocated a certain amount of funding to support the systems, and so you have to pick the best ones is one way to go about it. So Illinois created a scoring system. The highest scoring projects were the ones that get approved and get to go into the program and get built. So here's skipping to, I guess, oh cool, we can see it okay here. Here's just the sort of part of the scoring rubric they have. There's a lot of different points you get for different factors. One the built environment factor, they call it. The siting of the project, where it is and how it's built. They give you points for that. So you see up there it says siting on disturbed land, contaminated lands, or 2 points. That's not. Agrivoltaics are typically not contaminated land because we're growing crops on them, things like that. So that would not apply there. You would get those 2 points. But down here you can see commitment to utilize agrivoltaics, and that's actually kind of vague, isn't it? And that sort of speaks to the fact this is the 2024 scoring. They've got a new one coming out for the coming year, and but it kind of speaks to the fact that the agrivoltaics is kind of new. It is kind of still being defined what it is. We saw some examples of all the different types of agrivoltaics: sheep grazing, versus growing actual plants beneath them, pollinators, like you mentioned. And so, people who wrote the scoring, they knew that it's sort of a work in progress. So you make a commitment. If you award my system, we're going to build it, and we're going to build it with one of these agrivoltaic priorities in mind. They'll give you a point for that. And then just below that, a commitment to a pollinator-friendly habitat, which I think. Anyone have an opinion on whether or not pollinators qualify as agrivoltaic? Mm-hmm. I'd say so, right? Certainly if you're harvesting the honey, but at the very least, if it's not agricultural, it's got an ecological impact. It's definitely cool, and they will reward you with points for that. And so you hit a certain threshold for points, your project gets in, and if we're competitively tiebreakers with all the projects that meet that threshold. So it's just an example of one way you do it. People want to get into this program, and if you make that commitment and figure out, after you get awarded, you're probably going to do some research on what types of crops are going to be the best fit, and there's going to be a process there. So just bonus points in a competitive program is one way. New Jersey had a community solar pilot program where you could also make these types of commitments and get points for it. They've since moved on to a different scoring system that doesn't involve that, but it's one way to differentiate your project. And if you're going to implement policy that you want to sort of encourage that's a cost-free way to do it. All you can do is just differentiate yourself. So kind of a cool method. The next one is I'll just say it's a little more controversial. I'm afraid that Benoy is going to grill me on this topic. They are using additional revenue for projects that utilize agrivoltaics. So when you talk about additional revenue, more money, the word that best describes this might be incentive, which I'm working on policy in a few states. If you use that word, your legislation will not pass because it's a loaded word. So you try not to use the word incentive. But ultimately, it's a project is going to produce a kilowatt hour of power, and that kilowatt hour of power is going to get more money than a different kilowatt hour of power from a system that isn't agrivoltaics, and that's the differentiator. So this one here is, if you're having trouble making sense of this chart, that's why they pay us the big bucks, right? Because it's very. I looked at this for like 4 days straight before I figured out what it all meant, but. You can see a list of different things. It's pretty cool. If it's on, they're again trying to encourage the siting that they want, the types of projects that they want. Before I go into the types, I'll just jump over and you can see here 1.92 cents. That's per kilowatt hour of generation. Just to give you an idea, a megawatt size system, 1,000 kilowatts, makes about 1.2 to 1.5 or 1 million to 1.5 million kilowatt hours a year, depending on whether you're in Maine or Florida or a tracker or on a roof. But you make about 1 million of them, or 1.5 million of them on a megawatt size system, which is like a big commercial rooftop. You get 1.92 cents for each of those million kilowatt hours. Penny here, penny there, it starts to add up. And so that's the additional revenue you get on top of the base revenue that you get for producing electricity. You see 1.92, that is for putting it on a building mounted. Building mounted is legalese for a roof. It's a rooftop system. But we have floating solar, which we talked about, really cool, putting it on lakes and reservoirs. Brownfields, polluted land, landfills likewise. Canopies, which are very popular around here. And then, look there at the bottom, agricultural solar tariff. And there is a list of qualifying features on another page. I'm not going to bore you with that, but 6 cents, look at that, that's a lot of money. So again, just to do the napkin math on it, if you have a 5 megawatt system, that's about how big a typical solar field is. A 5 megawatt agrivoltaic system. It will make 6 million kilowatt hours a year, give or take, and each of them will get 0.06 cents. If I have a CFO in here who can do the back of napkin math on that for me, what is it? $36,000? Is that what 6 cents times 6 million? 36. Yeah.
Who's the mathematician here?
$36,000 extra each year from your production from this thing. So they are heavily encouraging this. There are added costs to doing it. The spacing, if you have to have them straight up, like we saw described, you're going to lose some production. So to make up for the lost production or the added cost to building them high up in the ground, and so the cost related to it, and then the benefit that comes with getting to use this land for two things, they've compensated you that way. So cash money. Likewise, there's another one down here for a pollinator. But again, this is very difficult to accomplish this in a lot of states because, again, it's just they look at it as an incentive that can add costs, and the benefits are sort of less easy to quantify in terms of like a customer's electricity bill and the cost of power. So really effective. Massachusetts has, I think, some of the most agrivoltaics projects in the country, and that's because they came out with this robust incentive. Again, industry's flourishing there, and there's a lot of farmers that are getting to host solar systems and get additional revenue while keeping doing what they do. So really cool, but like I said, very specific, works in certain places and not always. Moving along, relaxed siting rules for co-location. This is one of the more boring slides. It's all words. This is pulled directly from the recent HB 908, Maryland's community solar legislation. They had a solar program for like 6 years maybe, and then after testing it for that long, it was a temporary program. They implemented a permanent program and had this like sweeping legislation. Lots of solar in Maryland. They had a lot of experience with different solar and crafted a very detailed piece of legislation, like I said, that really addresses all the different types of solar. So that this is a piece that touches on again, they didn't just enable solar in the state, they're supporting preferred siting here. So if your community solar generating system may not be located on the same or adjacent parcel of land of an existing or proposed community solar energy system, if they would exceed 5 megawatts. So you can't put there's a limit on the system size to 5 megawatts in the program. So you could say, I'll just build one 5 megawatt, I'll put another one right next to it, because I have space for 10 megawatts, I'll just build 2 5s to get around the 5 megawatt limit. And now normally they would say that's called co-locating. You can't do that. You can't just game the system by getting under the limit by putting them side by side. That's really just one 10 megawatt system masquerading as 2 5s. But they'll say, hey, you know what, we will look the other way on that if they happen to both be agrivoltaic. The prohibition of co-locating, the prohibition of putting 2 5 megawatts side by side and exceeding the size limit in principle does not apply to projects on a site that was the site where all of the community generating systems installed after the program are used for agrivoltaics. There's a little semicolon, there's other things listed like rooftops and landfills, but I cut it off there. But yeah, in plain English again, this rule doesn't apply if you're building agrivoltaics there. So is there a cost involved to this? No, so this is also great, right? We're not asking for more money. We're just saying that this kind of rule that establishes the principle on size limits, these projects should be small. We're going to sort of waive that rule and let you do them side by side if you accomplish a different priority, which is we love agrivoltaics. So they let you slide on that rule. It doesn't require extra budgeting or anything like that. So it's got a financial impact without cost, which again is popular outside of Massachusetts. They have a slightly higher tolerance for spending on programs there. Kind of what we love about it, right? Yeah. Electricity, next, tax exemption for photovoltaics. This one is a much more quantifiable financial impact. Obviously, citing two systems side by side, you get a lot of economies of scale, and if you have two good places, why not use them? So there's savings there. Hard to quantify exactly what that is. This, however, has a dollar value. You would have been subject to a tax, a property tax, that you're not subject to. Now this one is a little more complicated here. Again, it's related to community solar. The personal property is exempt from county or municipal property tax if the equipment is part of a community solar system. It doesn't exceed 2 megawatts. So again, we're talking about size limitations, very common here. And provides 50% of the energy it produces to low to moderate income customers. So again, like we said, community solar, you produce the power, you allocate it to residences. So if you agree to allocate it to the low to moderate income people, and is agrivoltaics or rooftop or brownfield or canopy or one of the preferred sites. But if it's agrivoltaics, you give the power, you provide the power to customers that are low to moderate income, and you meet the other requirements. You don't have to pay property tax, which I don't know. It's probably like $10,000-$20,000 a year, maybe $15,000 a year on a 2 megawatt system that they reference here. It's significant, that adds up to. And so just like we talked about how the Massachusetts incentive can create $36,000 of revenue, this one reduces $20,000 of cost. Does it impact the potential taxable basis of the town? Yeah, but it's not adding any cost. It doesn't need to be budgeted, and ultimately this project is probably in other ways benefiting the municipality, the AHJ, because now you've got farming going on there, and that should bring revenue too, right? So it's a financially impactful policy lever that is not so controversial, and that's what makes it popular. And the next one here, I don't have any examples because it's just sort of a conceptual thing that is playing out across the country, and there may be specific ordinances that touch on this in certain, even small municipalities, counties, whatever. Gosh, it's really hard to read with that little cat there, isn't it? AHJ restriction is perhaps the biggest potential to expand the scale of agrivoltaics projects. Throughout the country, towns, counties, and AHJs are implementing harsh restrictions on the siting of ground-mounted community solar projects. All utility scale too, but these community solar projects, if it's on a field somewhere, you want to build it, you go to the zoning and planning board, and you show up there, you say, hey, I'd like the permit to build this on this field here. A bunch of people are going to show up and say, that was a beautiful piece of land that we like looking at, or the panels are, they got the 5G that's reading my mind, or there's all kinds of stuff that people say at these events. Some of it is reasonable, some of it is less so, but definitely it's the case when people say that if you're using up a lot of our prime farmland and now it's not going to be farmed, and farming is part of like the fabric of the community, and that is a reasonable concern. We can cite statistics about how we would use such amount of space on land could take care of all of our solar needs, and the rest could be open for farming, and we'll probably have enough space for solar and farmland. If you use it all effectively. It doesn't feel that way if your town is suddenly, a program has opened up in the state and your town is like the perfect place for it, and suddenly every farm is now covered in panels and nobody farms anymore. So it's a legitimate concern. By encouraging zoning and planning boards to be more receptive to permitting agrivoltaic projects, carving out exceptions to their zoning restrictions for projects that implement agrivoltaics, we can ensure that we make the best use of our green spaces to meet our clean energy needs without sacrificing food security or disrupting rural farm communities. Sometimes it's literally as simple. It looks like a room at a zoning and planning board with residents of a town, and it's not a law per se. It's literally, if you've come there and said, I'm proposing to do this thing where the farmers would still get to farm, but we'll put the solar up here. The people just on a personal, individual level might be less inclined to oppose it, and might actually think it's pretty cool. But it also can happen where if a town or a local county is looking at an ordinance that says we're going to ban solar of a certain size on green spaces, on farmlands, and they're about to write that law, you can insert language that's saying exceptions for agrivoltaics, something like that. Can any given town that's considering these ordinances or considering standards for where to put solar, that they, little tweaks to their rules that allow for this or provide preference for this just makes it easier to get permitted, could have huge impacts. So it's the most sort of nebulous and broad spanning policy lever that you need to get think locally on, but all this stuff is things that can help agrivoltaics grow. And I think that pretty much covers it. So I'm going to pop over to the thanks page here. I do have works cited here, so I didn't make that stuff up. And thanks to the good people at SlidesGo for the free software. Pretty nifty, all these images of people with the panels that I didn't design those. That's it. Look forward to hearing talking all about it.
All right, thank you, everyone. That was great. Sparked interest in a lot of different markets. And now, naturally, we're going to talk about New York and learn about what Jeremy Weibel, Senior Project Manager at NYSERDA, is doing to support these types of systems and research in New York State. Jeremy, take it away. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? My voice doesn't project as these charismatic fellows. I'll do my best. Got a lot of content to cover. I don't have the time to watch, but someone try to keep me honest on that. Thank you. I might go quick. Sorry. Try to slow me down if I go too fast. I love talking about agrivoltaics because I get to start with a farming slide, agricultural slide. So without farmers and growers, there is no agrivoltaics projects. They're just a big solar project that more expensive to build. So, does anyone here know what the New York State is known for from a top-ranked agricultural products perspective nationally? What do we grow more better than anyone else? That's number 2.
Maple syrup.
That's number 2.
Corn?
Dairy.
Corn's for dairy. Yep. Yogurt, sour cream, and cottage cheese. We're a big dairy state. In fact, New York State's a major agricultural state. We are in the top 10 of 30 agricultural commodities. My agricultural stakeholders and colleagues tell me that we have some of the best soils, and we have a temperate climate, and a ton of rainfall that's spread throughout the year. So not only are we really high in those products, but in our New York State Constitution in 1970, we added a policy to encourage the development and improvement of its agricultural lands for the production of food and other agricultural products. So that was 1970. Fast forward to 2019, I think we're most familiar with the Climate Act. So our goal is to achieve 70% renewable energy by 2030. The graph on the right is from the scoping plan that was directed to be developed from that Climate Act. Essentially, a bunch of strategies and recommendations for the state to achieve the Climate Act goals. This graph is from that. It shows the growth rate of solar capacity in the coming decades. 2050, there's projected to need 60 gigawatts of solar. So hold that in your brain for the next slide. We're going to take that to a land use perspective, similar to what Jack did nationally. So we got 30 million acres of land in New York. About 66% of that, or 18 million, is forested lands. Some of that's protected in the Adirondacks and the Catskills. According to the 2022 USDA Ag Census, there's about 6.5 million acres within farm operations. So that's 60 gigawatts. If we use roughly 5 acres per megawatt for a ground-mounted project, we need about 300,000 acres of solar to achieve that 60 gigawatt goal. Of course, there's other places we can put this: the brownfields, landfills, parking lots, rooftops. Definitely exploring that. We have programs in NYSERDA to do all that. But our large-scale renewable program, which I'm part of, we're trying to develop policies to protect these natural resources, forested lands, agricultural land. So I'll get into that a little bit. But for context, American Farmland Trust put out the Farms Under Threat report earlier this century, or over a 15-year period. they estimate 250,000 acres was converted, farmland was converted. Mostly non-solar. Solar in New York State really picked up in 2016 from a ground mount perspective. So most of that was just urban development, urban sprawl. All right, so not all of these projects will be agrivoltaics. We want to see as much of that as possible. And it's just, I'm not here to debate if 1% is too much, too little, but it just kind of supports the reason why we should look at dual use in agrivoltaics and explore this. To reduce the land competition. All right, so NYSERDA, we recognize that we want to promote the agricultural policies in New York State. We work with a lot of agricultural stakeholders in the energy sector to try to cite and develop and live under programs in a more responsible way. This is just a summary from our programs. There's 5 listed here. Some of the agricultural policies that overlap with solar. The highlighted ones I'll cover in more detail on slides. I'm going to skip them, but starting at the top left, the LSR program in New York Sun. So large-scale renewables is the big ground mounts, the whole-scale markets, injecting power in the grid. New York Sun is the distributed generation projects, your community solar projects. Both of those programs require agricultural markets solar construction guidelines to protect the soil so they can go back into farm production in the future. Jumping down to Clean Energy Siting Team, there's a solar guidebook, there's a model law for municipalities and landowners and other stakeholders. That's been updated to incorporate dual use and agrivoltaics content. And they're actually in the middle of updating that again with more robust dual use agrivoltaics content. Our commercial and industrial programs, they offer agriculture energy audits and other technical assistance support. Our environmental research program, we awarded our first dual use research projects through Program Opportunity Notice 4270 a few years back. The Cornell School of Engineering and American Solar Appraisers Association. That data, that research, I think is going to start coming out next year. There was other environmental research program awards through that, but they weren't dual use related. It's more about studying grassland and bird habitat and other community engagement. I'll cover the highlighted stuff a little bit further. All right, so more about the distinction between New York Sun and large-scale renewables for these next 2 slides. For those who aren't familiar with New York Sun, it's more of your traditional rolling application basis or program. There's a bunch of funds allotted. There's a block of capacity that you can apply for. If you qualify, you get those incentives. Sometimes there's a partial payment up front before you hit commercial operation, and then another payment once you build the project. Large-scale renewable program is different. So we can't have adders like New York Sun and the Massachusetts program that didn't insure us. We only provide payments once they build a project and start operating and delivering renewable energy certificates. So we have annual competitive solicitations, and the majority of that is based on, to protect the ratepayers, is 70% is really on price. So we're limited on our ability to kind of, if a project, someone wants to develop a big agrivoltaics project, they're not going to compete because they're not going to win on price. So we have to get creative with the levers we have to try to encourage smart solar siting. So one clever way is through this agricultural mitigation payment. Is anyone familiar with this by chance? Okay, so in a nutshell, if a project is siting on more than 30 acres of prime farmland, what we call mineral soil groups 1 through 4, they have to pay a payment once they hit commercial operation. Sometimes this can be in magnitude of hundreds of 6-figure numbers. We give the developer an option. They can defer that payment if they submit us an acceptable agricultural co-utilization plan, and that they're going to deploy an agricultural activity for 5 years after commercial operation. And they'll provide us research information, yields, agricultural yields, cost information, gross revenue on an annual basis. And at the 5-year mark, if their expenses that are eligible, we'll offset that payment. So essentially, rather than paying the fee, they're working with farmers to develop an agricultural project and offset that payment to the state. So that's one clever way, at least I think it's clever, given the policy factors we have to promote that. And this project, in case anyone's interested, is the first large-scale renewable program through our project that hit operation. It's the Branson Solar Project that's 20 megawatts, roughly 100 acres up in eastern New York. Hit commercial operation in 2021. And this was awarded before this payment came about, and this was less than 30 acres of MSG, so it would not have had a payment regardless. All right, so the other way we're trying to encourage dual use and agrivoltaics is through our scorecard that Dylan hit on, the Illinois one. So New York has our own, at least our Scale Renewables, as our Smart Solar Siting Scorecard. We are not a regulatory agency, so we try not to overlap with DEC, Office of Regulatory Siting, and that whole process, because there's wetlands and all that stuff's heavily regulated. So we just focus on forested lands, which are less protected than some of the others, and agricultural lands. So the scorecard primary objective is to steer developers away from siting on these forested lands, prime farmlands and active production, and also to encourage community engagement. Depending how well they do that, they'll get different types of points. And then secondarily, there's minimization strategies. And there's so many in there, about 60. Don't have time to go through today. But on the screen here is just the highlights of the dual use and agrivoltaics strategies and that we have in the prorating table. We're trying to encourage more of the site, at least 80% of the site to be dual use. That's the goal. And if they do that, they get 7 bonus points. So we break this up separate it out for pollinators and ecosystem services, livestock and livestock products, and crop production. And I meant to say early on, I'm trying to disseminate information. This is not perfect. We're trying to build this. I think we're one of the few states that are ambitious enough to kind of develop this type of tool. So if you have any clever ideas, please how to improve this, let us know. I'll look for that back with my colleagues. The A-Twig stakeholders. So moving on. This I have to be a little careful about. So due to competitive solicitation rules in New York State, there's an active agrivoltaics research and demonstration RFP that's out in the street. The deadline to submit is September 12th. I can't answer questions on this. Any questions have to go to that email address, but I can discuss what's on the slide here. So there's $5 million that New York State is trying to award to advance projects that integrate solar and farm operations, such as cattle grazing, forage, specialty crop production, that agree to participate in research and data sharing. Is through our environmental research program, and I'll tell you why sheep was excluded from this in a few moments. But yeah, we're excited to see where the results of this. The environmental research program also kickstarted this agricultural technical working group in 2021. One of my colleagues left in 2022, and I inherited this project, but it's been a learning experience, but a lot of fun. It's an independent advisory body to the state of New York and to the participating entities to provide feedback and guidance on how to advance renewable energy in a responsible manner while keeping the agricultural sector in mind. So there's a broad group of stakeholders here: state agency, local government, solar industry, NGOs, farmers, land advocates. All of our information is on the A-Twig website, our presentations, and other things. Within the A-Twig, we developed or created 3 specialist committees to dig deeper on certain areas of need and data gaps. The scorecard, which we mentioned earlier, there's a subcommittee that gives us feedback and guidance to improve that year over year. Agrivoltaics, I'll cover that in a few more slides. And then the regional RACE, our newest subcommittee, regional agronomic impact from solar energy. This is really to assess the impacts and benefits from solar energy and the regional agricultural economy. It's very ambitious, but we're trying to figure out how much solar in any hyperlocation is too much where the feed supplies the pets kind of leave town. And there's just not enough agricultural productivity for the rural fabric of upstate New York and certain locales, which are we're seeing a lot of solar projects being proposed. So, Agrivoltaics Specialist Committee, a lot of language here, I'm not going to read it all for you, but I want to highlight, so this stakeholder group, we spent a lot of meetings getting this language and the following slide nailed down. And the biggest part here I want to stress is that we want to, for at least this group, we're looking to advance agrivoltaics. That's beneficial to farmers and their communities to encourage solar to be developed. Here's the underlining part. While maintaining and demonstrating viable commercial agricultural operations. We want to make sure that there's viable ag businesses spiraling out of these efforts. Yeah, a lot of discussion about how to define agrivoltaics, and this is a working definition. This sector is emerging, evolving. We all, I know folks in this space, debate hours over this. We had a lot of meetings over this one single definition. So I'll read it and then I'll give you the layman's version. So simultaneous use of land for solar, photovoltaic power generation, and agricultural production of crops, livestock products is that phrase is defined in Agrivoltaics Law 3012. So the layman's term is inside the solar security perimeter fence, you have to be producing a crop or agricultural product, which I'll get to in the next slide, consistent with this. So if it's outside the fence, at least this working group saying that's not true agrivoltaics. If you're trying to grow food in that vegetative buffer, that screening buffer, that's awesome, that's great, but it's not true agrivoltaics according to this working group. And this is an abbreviated list of that statute in the Agri-Markets Law. If anyone can solve for growing maple sap in an agrivoltaics project, let me know. Yeah. So it's not
30 foot.
Yeah, right. This slide isn't to say what's feasible, but it's just kind of what Agri-Markets defines as an acceptable crop. This also aligns with farmers if they want to get an agricultural assessment through their local tax assessor to get a tax break. They have to be producing one of these crops at certain revenue values on an annual basis. All right, that was the content part. Now we get into the easier stuff, some maps, some photos. NREL's Inspire put out an agrivoltaics map a few years back to track and log all the projects being developed throughout the country. And this is the first initiative that I'm aware of that did this. Granted, still the onus is on developers to submit the project as they come along. New York, we have a lot of sheep, a lot of pollinators. Our neighboring states have some crop production. That's why we're doing that research RFP. We want to see what's possible, what's feasible for New York in our farmer, in our agriculture industry context. We see a lot of sheep that's maturing. That's why it's excluded, partially why. And speaking of sheep, American Solar Grazing Association, I believe this is their survey that was published last year, put forward last year, was funded by NREL Inspire. This is the preliminary results of that survey engagement of solar grazers throughout the country. Over close to 100,000 acres are being grazed by sheep throughout the country. Still TBD on how many acres are in New York, but anecdotally I'm hearing maybe 2,000 acres of sheep are being raised on solar projects in New York State. So it's mature. There's a real industry there for sheep, and we get so much of our land imported from New Zealand that it seems to make there's opportunity. Another ASGA, American Solar Grazing Association product is a solar farm grazing map where they're trying to match solar grazers with solar projects and other enthusiasts. So there's over 30 solar grazers on this map in New York State looking for projects. All right, a little technical here. Jack and Dylan covered this a little bit. But large ground-mounted solar projects, they used to be all fixed tilt. Now they're shifting to the single-axis tracker or other creative designs. There's two nomenclature options here for a single-axis tracker. Typically, there's definitely more involved ones, overhead and others. But it's either one module in portrait, typically, or two modules in portrait. And this is kind of going down that slope of design, tools in the toolbox. There's a lot of pros and cons for both. But when you go 2 modules in portrait, some of the other presenters kind of hit at this, your row spacing gets larger. And the biggest impediment for the stakeholder groups and farmers I hear is they don't want the aggravation of driving big equipment between these solar panels that they can damage. So 2 panels in portrait allow you to still maintain a power density and a CapEx cost that can be financeable. Better so for an agrivoltaics perspective, in my opinion, than single panel. And if you're trying to get farm equipment through the access aisles of the arrays. So, an example of that is Clean Path Energy's project in upstate New York. They developed the largest operating agrivoltaics project I'm aware of in the state, 5 megawatts in Lowville. They also have one in Little Falls, which is bigger. So the row spacing here is 2 modules in portrait. They have 45 feet between the rows when the modules are in a horizontal tabletop position. And the next picture shows the farmer. After he got done haying it, first hay cutting that they did last fall. It's promising to see this happening, some larger equipment. Speaking of, so that hay production was for his cows. Speaking of cows, the Department of Energy has this thing they're calling a LASSO prize, Large Animal and Solar System Operations. There's $8.2 million up for grabs for multi-stakeholders to come up with, solve this challenge. How can we get cattle on these projects at a cost competitive rate? So really excited where this goes. The deadline for this submission is in September as well. And another toolbox, mentioned some of the other presenters mentioned, is the vertical bifacial system. That definitely take a power and production hit, but for independent system operator regions where there's that phenomenon in the solar industry where there's a duck curve occurring and you want to shift your production to mornings and afternoons, this might be an option in the future for those markets that experience that duck curve. And lastly, if I didn't lose anybody and you really want to get deeper into this after our discussion later today, there's an Exert Agrivoltaics page with a bunch of resources, and what's on the screen here is 4 that are New York specific, that are all published in the past year. NIPA put out something with EPRI, H New York, a big stakeholder organization, Advancing Clean Energy New York, and then my service, A2A, and our technical contractor, WSP, put out two documents, Growing Agrivoltaics New York State report, and then the bottom document is really interesting for solar developers and landowners. So consideration for grazing ready solar facilities, planning for integration of sheep. So we're trying to push that document for have more sites built in a way that can be grazed in the future, even if they don't have a solar grazer ready and identified during the development phase. At least build the project in a manner that fairly minimal incremental cost and can be grazed fairly readily in the future. And that is all I got.
I have a question, if I may.
So we're going to transition to a Q&A thing right now.
Oh, okay.
If you wouldn't mind holding on to that for a few minutes.
Do this without the projector being.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that's probably like.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, if you want to sit in the middle, you can. Like wherever it's where
Oh, you're closer.
Well, this is very ergonomic. Is this,
Projector's okay?
that makes sense, right?
So we're gonna the house lights a bit.
I think the
Projectors in anyone's eyes. Good. So otherwise that might just let's just back up. Yeah. Just have this in the background. That's fine. So I'm actually one of those things. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Benoy. But we have a guest moderator for our Q&A panel here, Benoy Thanjan, host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. and founder and CEO, or
Founder and CEO, yes.
of Renew Energy. So take it away, Benoy.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, this is an amazing panel. I know it's a lot of information in a very short period of time, especially if you're not familiar with agrivoltaics. And it's great that someone already has a question. I'm basically just moderating the questions. I forget there was someone who had a question.
Yes, I'm wondering why sheep and not goats, and are they used for meat or milk?
Goats will eat the wires, the cables, and
everything.
and climb everything. Yeah.
Everything.
And are they meat or milk?
Most of it's meat.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions, or I can start? Sure. Maybe it would be great actually if you could say your name, what company you're associated with, if you're not in the question that you have.
Okay, my name's Liz. I am associated with the GreenHomeNYC program, and I'm a volunteer since 2023 or 2022, I don't remember. But I'm here now, and my question is, someone in their presentation explained or was like mentioning something about like floating.
The photovoltaics.
Floating solar,
Can
yeah.
somebody please explain that? I've never heard of that.
Do you have something you can?
We've got some projects of floating solar. Basically, what you're doing is it's the solar panels are on pontoons that are on a lake, and so it's the giant benefits are evaporation gets dramatically reduced, and you're basically covering the reservoir, and it could be covering. There are times when it's put on a waste treatment plant, but that's a very caustic environment, so it's a little nastier place to be. But oftentimes it's on a reservoir, and yeah. Does that answer your question? Anything specific?
I'm like picturing something in my mind, but I'll look it up later. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's a big flotilla with rows and rows of flotilla, and they're all floating on the water with a bunch of solar panels. The wires are then leaving. Oftentimes, I mean, in Asia when we've done it, we let the inverters be out in the floating out there, but oftentimes the wires are going onto the shore where all the electronics are.
Your question?
My name is Alex. I work for Con Ed. Curious how the O&M, or the maintenance cost of an agrivoltaic compares to standard voltaics on bare land. I imagine there's more dust or
You do too.
That is
We
not-
both have
I-
lots of that probably.
O&M stuff is a little more in your.
Because O&M is our thing, right?
Yeah,
Because we're the equipment supplier.
Yeah.
And so, some things to consider with O&M on agrivoltaics, it's higher up. And so if you're using traditional trackers, because over 90% of ground mount is going to be single axis tracker. Now you saw all those weird different kinds we use overseas, but really in the US it's going to be single axis tracker. When it's higher off the ground, it makes it some additional cost to install it and some additional cost to do maintenance for it. And that's kind of our thing, because our drive units are 15 pounds, so we're little tiny drive units. And also all that SolarEdge 1 stuff I said, you can see where your problem is before you go there. So we are really focused on that part of it. But those are the elements to consider is all the sites will also have a lift truck, right? So they'll have to have a lift there and or ladders, things of that nature. But it is more expensive. So just generally speaking, not that I want to talk it down, but agri-PV is going to be more expensive than traditional ground mount, but then it's got that whole dual use element.
Oh, Colson?
I'm Colson. I work for an environmental commodities trading shop. I have a question for Dylan, which was that I noticed that most of the policy was state specific. And I wonder if there's any federal incentives, i.e. IRA or and then also farm bill. If there's any like federal incentives that incentivize agriculture.
Yeah. So the big piece of federal legislation, great question, is the IRA, and I don't believe they, to my knowledge, they talk about agrivoltaics in the IRA, except to say that they provide a lot of DOE funding and USDA funding for programs that can choose. And I think you mentioned one, didn't you? A federal program?
NREL's Inspire.
Yeah, there was this is the challenge to get.
Oh yeah, the LASSO.
LASSO, and that's federal funding, right?
Yep.
So federal funding there. These are sort of programs again that probably have not. The senators and Congress people haven't written that law. They've given funding to let the experts figure out, and the USDA. I follow USDA funding. They've got Rural Energy for America program and things like that where they support solar in farm communities and stuff like that. But I don't recall a specific USDA focused agrivoltaics, and that may be something that they're considering.
Yeah. There's 2 marker bills for the farm bill in play. Allegedly, they're bipartisan, supported for agrivoltaics research at a federal level. If memory serves me right, they're trying to deploy $15 million for 3 years or so to get the USDA to do research.
That's a proposed legislation? Is that what you're
proposed
saying?
last year.
Oh, cool.
And they're trying to get it in the farm bill.
Yeah.
Some stakeholders not moving from my tracking, but it's a possibility.
But yeah, a lot of this stuff happens on the state level. That's the primary driver for solar, I'd say.
Hello, you had a question?
Yes, please. My name is Mao. I'm a new volunteer at GreenHomeNYC. So my question is about solar panel. Because I was a statistics guy, and I'm just looking for different ideas. So, are there any bigger opportunities for analytics and computer vision to come in for agrivoltaics? I really not I know nothing about this field, but maybe you use camera to track where the sheep are, where the cattle are, and optimize something, optimize your fertilizer, optimize the size. What do you see where is the biggest opportunity?
You mentioned something about panels that are give you the optimal sunlight, right? The optimal sunlight, right? Wasn't that
I'm just gonna be selling SolarEdge tonight. That's all I'm doing. So we're spending a bunch of time with the different research organizations, trying to give them data, right? So we give them all the knobs to be able to turn the power up and down, basically, and we give them all the data that they can see granularly where the energy is coming from. We also build them shading models. So there's a whole bunch of software I'd be happy to talk to you about. But it's the tracker company used to be they're kind of a halfway a software company because there's that much to the software element of what we're doing with SolarEdge 1. So the software is a big part of what we're up to and trying to enable agri-PV going forward.
Yeah, SolarEdge is awesome. It helped me with a lot of my customers when they have a question about something that's up and running. I can just boom SolarEdge. But real quick before moving on, there's this young kid was at a networking event a few weeks back was telling me about the true cutting edge right now, which is ecovoltaics, which is designed to improve soil and stuff like that. It's not. It's so it's. I think that the idea is that if after like a 25, 35 year lifespan of the modules there, when you do remove them, the ground underneath them is going to be very fertile, more so than when you put them in. And I guess it's a time, and if you've got the fixed equipment there, theoretically you can. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but.
Yeah, if I can add, there's a lot of innovative opportunities from an analytics perspective, especially on the research side, and the sensors and the probes you need. Is follow up on that. Pretty sure Cornell, and probably collaboration with a few other land-grant universities, developed a fake flower, if you will, that instead of researchers watching and observing pollinators come on a real flower, they can just get all this data from these pollinators that are coming to this fake, lack of a better term, fake flower,
wow,
and getting amazing research from ecosystem service pollinator activity. And just another kind of random example is track collars to track cattle in the rotational graze solar facility, so that the panels kind of track, in theory, so that they would kind of go to a tabletop position, so the cows wouldn't butt up to them if they're kind of more tilt angled. So a lot of analytics there, especially from a cattle grazing perspective. Tabling solar panels and understanding energy lost versus gained, and yeah, there's so much potential in my opinion.
Noah, you have a question?
Yeah, Noah, GreenHomeNYC volunteer. Note on the floating solar, we actually have a potential speaker for tonight on floating solar. So stay tuned for the next solar focused event, either later this year or likely sometime next year, where we're going to talk about floating solar. On the analytics side, there's some really interesting research out of Cornell that looks at the carbon, looks at the sheep density. So what is the ideal number of sheep that you should have per acre on a site? And that's publicly available. So we can definitely link up and find that together. I do have a question. So I'm curious from all the work, especially that you've been doing, Jeremy, with stakeholders, farmers, solar developers, municipalities who want to see more agrivoltaics and see it really become more feasible, and also both Jack and Dylan's work. Is there a crop? You had a whole slide with 24 crops. Is there a crop that people are most excited about, that farmers are most excited about? There's a lot of hay, there's a lot of corn, there's a lot of soybeans in New York State. Is there something that maybe is even more valuable that would make sense on an agrivoltaics farm? I'm curious what you're hearing. What do people want to see out there to make it really?
I think it's really landowner dependent, farmer dependent, regional. Like, what do they want to grow? I know it's not answering your questions. That's where it's not a cop out, but you really need that farmer invested, see the entrepreneurial opportunity in front of them. And we're trying to make sure more developers understand the different tools in the toolbox to work with farmers early on in this process and not be an afterthought. Don't start thinking about this once you build a project and get commercial operation, because then it's too late.
It's not maple syrup. That was just a big maple lobby getting there.
Yeah, like in Colorado, it's a whole bunch of grassland, so it's hay, and then every other region is just specific, like you were saying, just specific to the region. Like in some areas, they want shading they have shade crops like blueberries or raspberries, where shading is a necessity. Large leafy, where shade is a necessity. So it's really region dependent.
Yeah, if I could add, sorry, that Clear Path Energy project that I had a picture of, that farmer was land constrained. He only had back 40 for growing hay on, and he wanted to go solar. He's like, well, I'm not going solar unless you let me still hay the field, because I need that for my cows. So it's really farmer driven so far what I'm hearing.
I saw 2 or 3 questions.
My name is Pat, volunteer for GreenHome. I have a question for Jack. So in regards to talking about, since you're a farmer, in regards to the sheep, would you say that basically that they pretty much, because I know it's a Jeremy mentioned that they chew through wiring and jump over fences and just, would you say it's basically it's just like, they just need their spots to just like run and get that energy out? How does Colorado?
So I have 35 kilowatts on my farm, so I'm a small farm, 42 acres with sheep. But the sheep grazing is typically it's pretty much a standard configuration. Now they do some protection on the wire coming out of the driven pile, but that's about all you really have to do. The drip angle it really is such that the sheep grazing they'll rub against the driven piles. Everything, cows are the worst because they weigh 1,500 pounds, but the sheep rub against the piles and they really don't damage anything. They can't really reach the top of the panel when it's at a full angle, so there's not a lot of impact, as it were. Not a lot of impact. And then I also do hay. And hay is a really low revenue product. No offense to all the hay farmers, but like a 40 acres, you can't do a whole lot of hay. So yes, it's dual use, but there's not a lot of revenue coming from here.
And just to clarify, it was goats that was the ones that are concerning. Sheep are very compatible.
Yeah, goat, and you can protect for goat farming. I just don't see goat farming as common as sheep farming. Yeah.
Are you seeing more family-run farms or commercial, large commercial institutions going down this way?
Well, I would defer to you. We have both, but
Yeah, I mean, we're still trying to spark this movement in New York State. The handful I'm familiar with is more smaller farms at the moment that are looking to do hay or sheep. And others.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, so Jack was talking about how, my name's Will, I work for Team Construction Management in Brooklyn, and Jack was talking about how certain crops benefit from shading with the agrivoltaics, and I was wondering if there are any examples of family farms or commercial uses for that, or examples in New York State.
In New York State, I'm sure there are. I just don't know about them. But yes, shade-tolerant crops, a lot of your greens, brassicas, and does anyone have a better answer to that?
Yeah, so CSU as well as Cornell and Rutgers, all three of them are doing research on that. What they're finding is that no one's ever thrown a tarp over a field and done the direct research on being able to turn light on and off of. And they're finding that, like a lot of the grasslands of Colorado, that by 11 a.m. the plant becomes saturated. It starts to create hydrogen peroxide as a byproduct to protect itself for the rest of the day. And it also takes a lot of water. So you're all of a sudden making a hay crop or a grassland crop more efficient. And the same thing with any large leafies. Large leafies that have direct sun, they don't want direct sun. The basil, spinach, chard, all those large leafies don't want direct sun all day. And then a lot of the berries, blueberries don't want, some blueberries don't want direct sun, neither do raspberries. So they're finding that all of a sudden there's new revenue stream by doing dual use.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hi. My name's Harry. I'm also here with the GreenHomeNYC. And I think it was Dylan maybe mentioned some, like, not in my backyard type stuff with solar. There's some, like, maybe community pushback for various reasons. But I'm kind of curious, like, what is some reasons you hear why farmers don't want to partake? One that came to my mind was, farmers do like to do rotating crops every couple of years. So one configuration that would work for one crop wouldn't work for another. So I'm wondering how often you run into that. Like, what are some reasons farmers don't want to participate? And is that one of them?
So I haven't developed a lot of agrivoltaic systems and spoken to a lot of farmers about their motivations. I can say that going back to your product again, right? That it's out. Anytime we're trying to sell solar to anybody, to host a system or have a system, whether it's a widget maker in a factory in New Jersey or a warehouse with medical products on Interstate 80 out in Pennsylvania, or a farmer, it's outside of their area of expertise. So this is I do this thing, and you want to get me in this new business venture, and electricity has a fire risk. Is just immediate reactions that you have to get over with, no matter who the client. And yeah, so Solar Edge.
I would actually pull Noah into this too, because if we have a developer in the house here, sorry, point at you, but they're buying assets that could be agrivoltaic, and they have to deal with the local community that may or may not want that. Maybe you can speak to what the "we don't want it here" conversation looks like?
Yeah, it really varies pretty dramatically, especially in New York State, depending on the county and the local township. Different ways that you can interact with the community include having it be a community solar project, which you have the revenue stream actually delivering energy savings to customers. Designing in a way where you're integrating sheep grazing or actually some agricultural production definitely helps kind of calm the nerves of some residents. But even if kind of everything is perfect, you still might be trying to work with a community that just isn't quite ready yet. And that's okay, right? It's not going to be the perfect fit for every community. But as a developer, as an owner-operator, where you're going to be responsible for this project for as many as 40 years, you need to have a long-term vision of how are you going to interact with the community. And a lot of what we're talking about tonight, the think is kind of on that wavelength of how do we build these things better so that the people who are benefiting from them and who are living in that community are, able to be as much a part of the project as possible and be part of the development throughout and those decisions of how are we designing it, how are we going to maintain it, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And the other thing too that Jack mentioned is when you talk to farmers as a solar developer, and you're telling them to go into a new business, it's hard to convince them, especially when they're used to their form of business. So I found, and working with farmers who are consultants to educate farmers about solar has been really helpful. There's actually a pretty famous, I know we were talking about this before, Ian Ward, he has a company called Solag, and he's a farmer in Massachusetts who basically helps solar developers educate farmers across the country about solar and about agrivoltaics, and coming from a farmer's perspective, which, he's speaking their language and makes it a lot easier for them. And actually Blue Wave, if people are familiar, is one of the first developers to do like agrivoltaic projects in Massachusetts under the SMART program.
They got those 6 cents.
and Maine as well. I think it was Maine, that they did the other agrivoltaics project. Actually, it's interesting. The podcast that I have, the Solar Maverick Podcast, our most popular one is episode 106, which is about dual use with Ian Ward from Solag and Drew Pearson from Blue Wave. And it's amazing from that podcast, like how many developers called me because they wanted to get into agrivoltaics. And this episode came out 2.5 years ago, but still are talking about the major points that they spoke about. And too, Jack, I also wanted to talk about the conference. This is the second year of the Agrivoltaics conference that happened in July in Rosemont, not technically Chicago, Illinois. I was at the first conference last year, and it was an amazing turnout. And it was amazing, all the farmers and all the sort of unique ways people are incorporating agrivoltaics. If you could talk about like that experience. If you don't know, Dan French is the one who organized it. They actually have a lot of great content on their website if you want to learn more about agrivoltaics and their conference. I don't know if you want to talk.
Well, they doubled in size year over year, which was amazing. And then there was a whole bunch of other suppliers there. So suddenly they had this little hallway with 3 different people presenting something, or suppliers, and one room where they're talking, or 3 rooms they're talking. Now it was in a whole complex. So the scale of increase is really dramatic, and the speaker platform was also extraordinary. A lot of farmers, I think historically, the farmers don't really trust a guy like me showing up with one of those jet sport coats trying to tell them that he can do solar on his land. They really want to hear from a farmer. So there was a lot more of the farmer voice in the room, and there was certainly all the suppliers like myself all sniffed the opportunity there. So there was a lot more industry in the room too. So I think that was across the board, it had grown dramatically with companies like Blue Wave and Lightstar, which were kind of the stars of the show because they're really leading the way in agrivoltaics. But a lot of policy makers were there too. They had the governor was there speaking too. So yeah, it was and a lot of the numbers you saw in my presentation really came from the DOE, the Department of Agriculture, and the governor that spoke.
What was the name of that podcast again?
Oh, the Solar Maverick Podcast.
Solar Maverick, okay. Solar Maverick.
And I have Dan French on the podcast.
Dan French.
And actually, my job is to get. We had a Dennis Rodman, the former Chicago Bull, owns farmland in Texas, and he was at the first year of the conference. I don't know. So I actually have this phone number. We're trying to coordinate having him being the commencement speaker.
They do the speed dating? Is that what they do?
Oh,
Dan French does the speed dating.
So they do speed
you get to
dating.
meet, if you're a farmer, you get to go to an event like this, and everybody gets like 2 minutes with you to try to convince them like they're the one you should go with. And I think it's great for farmers that are really trying to figure out who they should work with. So it's a great format.
Yeah, you have farmers across the country because you don't have to pay admission to come, and then they do the speed dating, as Dylan said, with developers, where they could talk to them about their land and whether they could do agrivoltaics. So
very cool.
Sierra, you have a question?
Yeah, hi. My name is Sierra and I work for a solar developer based in Hawaii actually, which I have seen one of the agrivoltaic products out there, the only one I've seen in person. But
Did you come over from Hawaii to be here today?
I did not. So I am based here, and everyone says, why are you here instead of in Hawaii? But my rest of the team is over there. But I was wondering, this is a question a little bit for you, Jeremy, and then also Dylan, for you as well. Are there any efforts from a government or policy level to try to connect farmers that have maybe pulled positively towards agrivoltaics with developers that specialize in it, or is there any kind of, I know you just mentioned the speed dating that happened at the conference, is there any mechanism formally trying to do that at the policy level, or that's all just out of curiosity?
There's discussions of that through the Agricultural Technical Working Group. American Farmland Trust, they're doing the most work there that I'm aware of. New Jersey, their team in New Jersey developing a farmer training, grower training for agrivoltaics. And they're going to try to roll that out, if it's successful, to other states and other AFT kind of divisions to, hey, farmers and growers, here's the opportunity, here's what you need to know, and how to kind of navigate those discussions with solar developers, and the different trainings you need to be aware of from an electrical safety perspective and the like. So we're hopeful to have one of their trainers present at our next agrivoltaic specialist committee meeting to give us better ideas of how we can develop some policy to push that forward in New York.
Also, we're going to say.
But yeah, no, there's a lot of companies that there's a lot of the federal government can create like tools, like finder tools and stuff like that. That's very common with community solar. People put their name on a list, or people put projects on their list. And they could facilitate that. Not aware of anything like that, but that's a kind of a great idea because that's not too costly. You just need to have someone sort of write that tool, put it up on a website, and then use the bullhorn to promote it a little bit. And it seems like a great idea.
Yeah, the Ask a Solar grazing map that I showed, and I sort of funded that. So as an example, but it's really sheep or grazing focused, but yeah, it'd be great to expand that for other opportunities.
All right, no, that you too. Benoy, thanks, sir.
Hi, I'm Pankuri. I'm from Amazon. My question is more about just the technology in general. What do you anticipate as like the future of agrivoltaics? What's the next generation agrivoltaic look like?
I mentioned ecovoltaics, which is like the precursor. It's like sort of the prequel to agrivoltaics, right? You have an ecovoltaic system, and then you've got rich soil that you can have a next generation agrivoltaics. So that's something that people are doing. It's a little different, right? So that would just be my 2 cents there.
Sure, I don't know if wish I had a crystal ball. But yeah, I think the near term is that 2P single axis tracker has a lot of potential opportunity for at a large scale utility scale. And then just the technology to operate that Solar Edge and others are trying to deploy to give the farmer the tool on the app to try to maneuver the panels when they have to go on a harvest. Okay, let's get them in tabletop positions so we can get our farm equipment in there on this day and have them more kind of interactive with the technology.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an equipment-based, and it's all about cost. Reducing cost, pulling cost out. That is really the future of making dual use be a similar cost to the current ground mount systems. And so as an example, our tracker will go to 90 degrees, right? It'll go, typically trackers go 60 to 60. Ours will go 90 degrees so you can drive the tractors through. And it's lower weight. So all these little things add up to trying to reduce cost. It's all about reducing cost to make it more cost-effective.
Thomas from Renaissance, the local CDFI. Are these agrivoltaic projects NPV positive without the incentives? If anyone can speak about the range of returns for these type of projects?
Probably in certain markets, you could say that, in certain markets, the cost of electricity is incredibly high and the value of producing it is very high. And so, you don't necessarily need anything more than what any other product, even if it's going to cost a little bit more to build and by the spacing may produce a little bit less in the right market, you won't need anything more than what else is already there. But yeah, there are those cost challenges, and that you need to find some way to compensate the benefits, and the simplest way is some type of cash incentive. So.
And sheep grazing, that's the closest to net neutral
Yeah.
cost difference. That's why there's so much kind of advancement and maturity in that as an agrivoltaics activity.
Sheep grazing and pollinator don't cost more. Does not typically cost more.
Our last question. No.
Yes, Dorothy, my name. I've been following wind power, and I know they have a huge problem dealing with the huge blades, and they're evidently not recyclable, and they're buried. So I'm wondering if you can deal with the issue of reuse of your products or recycling and the lifespan. How does it work?
That's a huge new industry, is all those solar panels that a lot of were installed about 2008, 2010, and a lot of equipment. And so all of that has to be recycled. The other big front is batteries. So all of these new technologies, because renewable energy means intermittent energy. Renewable energy means when it's sunny or when the wind's blowing. So there's going to be a huge necessity for storage. And storage means you got a whole bunch of batteries or some other solution. That right now the day is won by lithium-ion batteries, and so there's a number of entrepreneurs and people I know that are recycling solar panels now. So they've got whole companies that are recycling solar panels. They'll go out and take defunct solar panels, and they'll also recycle the batteries. So every company has to have a recycling program, right? Every manufacturer has to go into a contract with, here's my recycling program.
The people are still landfilling panels in places, or starting where they don't have policy for it. But to speak specifically to agrivoltaics, the primary technology here is racking, right? So we're talking about steel itself. So, it's not going to contaminate the environment and can be reused if you're considering agrivoltaics versus any other type of solar. So.
Hi, I'm Alex. I work in enterprise software, carbon accounting software. I saw recently that China, they built enough solar capacity this last year to could have served like the entire amount of capacity required in the U.S. or some astronomical number. Do we also look to them as a leader in agrivoltaic innovation? And just maybe somebody can talk a little bit about the international landscape and are we ahead as a kind of a North American economy, or do we look at other countries as leaders in space?
This is kind of an IRA question too, right? This is the Inflation Reduction Act mandates that U.S.-made products will dominate going forward. So what that's doing to China is putting tariff. There's already a 30% tariff on solar panels coming out of China. And so all those solar panel manufacturers, and I used to work for SunGrow, so I know specifically what they do, but they basically then offshore their manufacturing elements. So they'll build it mostly, and then they'll send it somewhere else to have it finished. So that all those rules are being changed right now. And so the U.S.-made products are going to win the day based on the tax incentives. However, like you said, China, you can buy a solar panel in Europe for less than 20 cents a watt. And right now, the U.S. market, they're about 35 cents a watt for a utility scale project because the tariffs on top of that. So the future, right now, China is the machine for manufacturing renewable energy, with both in wind inverters and in solar. And with the IRA coming into play, things are changing. So everyone's waiting to see what's going to happen.
I know a guy who can get you panels for 34.
Nice.
To your point in terms of them being the lead, this is industrial policy, like sort of like mercantile industrial policy, and really in the IRA we did take a page out of China's book where the government is really helping this manufacturing, and that's where they get these panels there, produced there, so they're incredibly cheap there. When we're importing the components of them here and paying for the cost to have them delivered here and assembled. And so we talked about permitting being a challenge. It's probably a little bit more streamlined, let's say there. The zoning and planning being they're probably less colorful than what we have here would be my assumption. So things get built in places like that. You can do big scale things with that. But so and from a technology perspective, I guess there's certainly some innovation coming from there, but innovation from new equipment, new efficiencies, technologies happening everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, the most efficient panels, the technology China's using came from the US.
Right.
Just FYI.
So, but I definitely think that when you talk about the IRA creating a domestic manufacturing base, and so that we can make our stuff here and get the efficiencies that come with that, that is absolutely a page out of China's book. So you have the point.
Do you see, sorry, back to see. Do you see that the industries at some point is actually becoming more, as you say, more recycling their products and making things a bit more sustainable, in that sense, and reusing it, and you see that?
Yeah, the whole industry is everybody's mandated to now have to have a recycling plan. When 10 years ago, there was no notion of that.
Yeah, they determined that as a circular economy, so it's kind of like being built into having, in a sense it makes sense because it's in the long term it is more sustainable, it is renewable, renewable energy, and anything that is.
I think battery recycling, the components of batteries, is really going to be a big thing. They degrade very quickly. The cycle is a lot shorter. Panels can be up for 35 years and still be pretty productive. The components of a battery need to be replaced, it can take 10 years, honestly. And there's a big pop-up of, there's a area in the South Carolina, Georgia, where these companies are, startup companies are figuring out the best way to get all the valuable components and reutilize that equipment again. So it's in process.
A lot of companies like ours are all manufactured in the U.S. now too. So we're all moving to the U.S. as quickly as we can, we turned our Mexico factory off and moved it all to Florida and Texas.
We're trying to get some of those SolarRidge domestic content eligible inverters. So I got a friend there now, so I think I'll be
Nice.
Just going back quickly to your question about agrivoltaics, I think it's more advanced in other countries, specifically Japan and Europe. Drew Pearson, who worked at Blue Wave, did this whole research analysis that you could Google online, and it talks about different countries and their proliferation of agrivoltaics compared to us. We're still very early compared to other countries, and we thank our panelists and everyone who attended. I can't believe we've been talking about this for an hour and 50 minutes. So thank you, everyone.
Wait a second, don't we have a good Benoy question? Solar Maverick is here. We're all nervous about it.
Everyone was asking about great questions. I had some of the questions were actually already asked by the audience, so that's pretty amazing. And thank you to our panels. Thank you to GreenHomeNYC. Thank you for everyone.